Hello and welcome to the Indo Functor podcast. Today I have with me Mr. Max Resnick, uh, Mr. former big name Ethereum influencer. Then he became Benedict Arnold, I believe, and moved over to Solana Labs or Anza Labs. But dude, Max, you have been a very prolific figure, and I am so happy that I had a chance to talk to you today on the podcast.
Yeah, happy to be here.
You are, in many people's hearts, a hero, and in other people's hearts, you are a villain. First question, and I've just been like dying to ask this. How did it feel to be the main character on crypto Twitter for a
Uh,
few
it
months?
it never ends well, right? It never ends well. You kind of like that something's gonna go horribly wrong when you're the main character for any amount of time. So yeah, I honestly like turned out pretty well for me, so I'm pretty happy where I am. But yeah,
Yeah, I feel like, so from my point of view, I mean, I think you and I share a lot of the same beliefs. From my point of view, the types of people that took like a strong disliking to you tended to be the types of people where it's like, if they're not at least a little bit mad at you, you're probably not doing anything right. But like how was that? Because so you were a very prominent figure in research in the Ethereum community over at Consensus, and you were pushing really hard for a lot of changes. Since then, many of those changes have actually been acknowledged as stuff that Ethereum should work on. But back that 2-3 years ago, a lot of this was stuff where, how dare you say that Ethereum isn't perfect? How dare you propose improvements? And you antagonized a lot of people. Um, like as you were going through that period, like what was it like working inside of the Ethereum ecosystem?
yeah, I think like to play devil's advocate for the people who weren't too happy about that strategy. I think what they were basically saying is there's this path for Ethereum to be a very valuable token to have the price go up. And it doesn't involve solving a real pain point for users. It just involves like crafting a beautiful narrative. And for them, what I was saying on Twitter was harming that narrative. And so I think the people who were the most mad were like not the core protocol developers, but were the people who felt it was their job to basically be the narrative relayers of Ethereum and shill Ethereum on Twitter. And what I was doing, I think, was like directly in tension with what they were trying to do. But my point of view is like, I don't really care about that. Like I care about blockchain technology being a real thing, solving real pain points. At the time, I cared about Ethereum winning as a execution environment that actually people wanted to use, and driving revenue through fundamentals, like through actual fee accrual to the token. And I still kind of believe that's the end state here. But what you're seeing is kind of a validation of both points of view. On the side of the people who disagreed with me and were very annoyed with me, there was a claim like, hey, it doesn't matter for the price. And I think like in the short term, they were like obviously correct with what Tom Lee has been doing. Um, and he just kind of like found this narrative of the stable coins and just like started going on CNBC, and it just worked for what they wanted to do. And then on the other side, you have like the Stripe one launching. It's like a complete validation of the technical arguments I was making, which is that L2s are basically just blockchains. Why would you want to build a blockchain that's beholden to the throughput limitations of Ethereum? Just build your own. And we're seeing that with Stripe. So I think both points of view are like proven correct. And even though we're like arguing really hard, it's actually turned out that both were compatible with each other.
That makes a lot of sense to me. And I think that like it is interesting how you were pushing for people to be able to like really use the blockchain and really for like apps, right? It was a very app first mindset that you were pushing for, which was just sacrilege because back then Ethereum was trying to offload as much compute as possible to the L2s, and you were trying to focus on value accrual from like a more direct way, not price go up, but just like actual like fees and stuff like that accruing to Ethereum. And I always found it funny where like for one reason or another, like trying to like point out that actual value, actual cash flow was moving away from Ethereum was bad for the price. Like that is a very interesting thing, but it's like then again, crypto is like high beta tech play, and it's just such a risky asset. I don't think anyone's valuing any of these blockchains on cash flow fundamentals yet, right?
Yeah, I guess for a really long time, and still to some extent true today, most people consuming any sort of product related to crypto are the people basically holding the underlying asset and hoping it goes up. And now we're starting to see, with the tech improvements that have happened, especially on Solana, there's actually a lot of users who are interacting with the chain every day, and not just like holding on to their big stack of coins and hoping it goes up. And if most of the users are like people holding on to the stack of coins who don't actually use the chain every day because like they just want to like watch the price go up in their wallet, then for those users, like they don't know anything about on-chain metrics. If you start saying like negative things, they get spooked and they sell. And that's I think what the Ethereum people were worried about with my approach. I thought like, yeah, probably I wasn't like thinking too much about the price because it's like wasn't my area. I don't really care about that. I just wanted the thing to be good. And I thought that the price would eventually, in the long run, and I still think this is true, the price will follow the blockchain that is actually useful and actually generates fees. And on a 5-10 year horizon, that's like clearly going to be true. And I think Solana's winning on that metric today.
That's so interesting. But it's like so like a lot of these people's like criticisms with your approach was that it was very loud and very public, but it's not like you hadn't been trying before to be very private with a lot of this stuff, right? It's like it's not like Ethereum was some corporation where you just send some internal email. Like what was like the tension between like trying to do things internally and back channeling? Because consensus is a pretty like powerful entity inside of the Ethereum ecosystem in general. But it's like it's not like you like woke up one day and was like, I'm going to start blasting these guys on Twitter in front of everyone to see.
No, I was for a long time, I was quite muted. I would say like I was like under 5K followers. You can look at my tweet graph and just like how many tweets I was sending. And there's a very specific point, I think it was May of 2023, where I just like turned it on and something snapped. And I was like, this is not going well. And before that, I was basically just writing papers. I would send the occasional PBS as bad tweet, but I was not like out there spending a lot of time optimizing for clicks and views on Twitter because I thought that the way to implement change was actually to go directly and talk to everybody. And I applied for a few grants that didn't get accepted for some reason, even though they were like very small. And I like was trying to argue for these things and people were not listening. And eventually I just realized like the only way that this is going to change is if there's a cultural shift. And the only way to affect a cultural shift is to like be really loud and show that some of these fundamental truths that people think are not correct. And like you can't just do that by like, oh, maybe L2 roadmap isn't correct when everybody's already pointed in that direction. You really need to yank the steering wheel if you think that's the case. And that was my perspective.
Yeah, it's like pointing out that the emperor has no clothes is something where it'd be kind of weird if you just said it privately, right? If you're going to go all in, you got to go all in. And I think there was like a lot of growing momentum because this was also when a lot of like the Twitter anons were popping up. I think we did our first unalignment day, like roughly around that time. And it did seem like there were a lot of people where like behind closed doors, like even among like validators and very aligned people, and like even at the Ethereum Foundation, a lot of these people were like, yeah, you guys are right. It's just too political. We can't say anything publicly. And for a decentralized, permissionless blockchain, like it's not a super neat property, right?
Yeah, I think that describes it pretty well. I was getting a lot of inbound, like, hey, I'm glad that you're saying this. Like, we want to say this, but we can't because we have this thing that we're trying to pass, or we're trying to do this. And I guess now that I'm like more in the other role on Solana, like I feel like more of the protocol researcher. I can feel like what they were feeling, which is any one motivated individual is enough to take an idea down. And if you piss like the wrong person off, you're just never getting anything done again. And so I can see where they were coming from in terms of not wanting to talk, but it's obviously pretty dysfunctional to not be able to do that.
Dude, so I mean, I think, like, honestly, I mean, like, we've been friends for a while. I've always been rooting for you. I have agreed with pretty much everything you've said. And I mean, I'm a big fan, and I think it really vindicates a lot of your takes. And just like, not to uh, not to inflate your ego too much, but like I mean, you were right about a lot of this stuff, and then now Ethereum has like acknowledged it and taken a lot of these steps, and it's been like really interesting to see. I think the real tragedy from Ethereum's point of view is that, like, I mean, you were the catalyst that kind of got us over this like hump of like, hey, maybe we should talk about this stuff. But along the way, you kind of jumped ship. And so I guess like my next question for you, what was kind of the final straw that got you to start really looking at working at Solana and leaving the Ethereum community behind?
It was something that I was honestly like thinking about for a little bit. There was like some public drama at DevCon. It didn't really have much to do with that. I think it was really more about like a broader like structural frustration, and the negotiations like had already taken place before that, and it was just a matter of like making that decision. So I just kind of realized like blockchains are really really hard to change, and the only way you have like any sort of shot is if you're in a place where everybody's kind of agreed on the direction broadly of the protocol. So if the protocol is like everybody wants a different thing for Ethereum, like I would say the infinite garden, which is a great narrative, like it's a great like metaphor and narrative, it's not specific enough to actually drive protocol level change, in that it means like whatever you want it to mean for everybody. Whereas something like IBRL or internet capital markets, it's specific enough that we can take a proposal, we can map it against IBRL, we can map it against internet capital markets, and we can say like this achieves our directives. And I think that's like a really helpful thing because it means we're arguing over implementation specifics and not over the broader goal. And those were like also my goals. So my goals, like in looking at the Infinite Garden, was like, hey, this is a really cool place that DeFi can happen. If only we do these changes, it'll be way, way better. And, we'll have like DeFi Summer 2.0. And there was a bunch of other people who like, that wasn't their vision for Ethereum. And so the argument was not like, how do we achieve these things? It was, should we even be trying to achieve these things? And so on Solana, we have a lot of arguments about how to achieve those things, but we never are arguing about whether we should achieve them.
Let's talk about that. So you hopped over to Anza, which is that's like basically the Ethereum foundation of Solana. Is that like the right way to think about it?
I wouldn't describe it that way. So there's like Solana Labs, which is like they make the Seeker phone. That's where Tolly works. And then there's Solana Foundation. And then Anza is one of two core dev teams that are building clients. So we are building the Agave client, and Firedancer is building the Firedancer client. And that's like, I would say it's more like a core dev team than directly at the foundation. Solana Foundation is kind of the counterpart of the Ethereum Foundation.
That makes
So it's
sense.
more like working like maybe for the ETH people like Nethermind or Reth, or but we have both the consensus and execution clients together. So
So coming over to Solana, how has the cultural change been? Like, is it like is the political layout, or like, are there still centers of power that you have to like win over in order to push something through? Like, how's the from your point of view as someone that's like trying to make things better, which is an admirable goal. Like, how has the workflow process been, and like actually going from here's a way to make things better to it's live, it's better now?
yeah, I think it's been good. I think we've made some progress on a lot of things. We just recently had the Alpenglow proposal pass with 99%. There's other proposals that haven't passed that I've authored. It's definitely full
228.
contact, yeah, which was an inflation reduction proposal. It's like a full contact in the arena kind of thing, but at the end of the day, you kind of like slam each other, and then like you go out for drinks afterwards, and you're fine. Whereas in contrast, like on Ethereum, it was like everybody's really nice in public, and then in private, there's like all this like animosity. And so I think almost like people are like more rude in public than they are in private in Solana, and the other way around on Ethereum, which I like. I kind of like more visibility on the game that's being played. I'm pretty satisfied with how things are going. It's really hard to do the things that we're trying to do, but we're making progress on them.
Dude, the SIMD 228 thing was so interesting. So like I was like hanging out with a lot of the like relevant people during the weekend when they were voting on it, and just like seeing, dude, the fact that Multicoin, which is like the Solana version of Paradigm, and Totally himself were pro, as SIMD 228, and it still didn't make it through. Like, what are the odds on like like pretty much if Paradigm and Vitalik were to come out and say we're against this or for this thing, we want it to go through, like it would almost certainly go through just due to the way the power structures are. But to see Solana reject what is probably not a bad proposal was like really, really interesting for me to watch.
Yeah, I mean, Lily, who's the president of the Solana Foundation, was kind of a notable against advocate. So it wasn't exactly like a completely unanimous, all the big people were on one side. Um, there were people at Foundation who agreed, and there were people who didn't. And Lily had a really strong point of view that this was not a good idea, citing some kind of concerns about the uh, kind of the ongoing discussions with institutions and ETFs and, now these DATs. So she felt that having a higher nominal yield would help with those ongoing negotiations. And so she was a pretty strong critic. So um, from my perspective, it was kind of like, it was not like we had everybody who other people would consider like a insider or power broker on one side of the issue. There was actually just people on both sides, and that's why it failed.
That's cool though, and like I really like the ability to just like talk because I mean, dude, you know me. From my point of view, I used to dunk on Ethereum nonstop. Now I just
Mm-hmm.
like everything's already been said, and so I've turned my penchant for wanting to improve things to Solana. And I'll like, I mean, you know me, dude. I'm constantly talking about partial reverts, aka on-chain error handling. And dude, like every time I bring this up with Solana people, it's not a single person's been like, "How dare you say this?" It's been nothing but like genuine, like engagement and conversation. A lot of people agree. Some people will agree and like just like not think the trade off is worth it. But it's like the willingness to talk and to engage, and I'll like intentionally be a little bit spicy too. I would love to like be like because everyone likes conflict, right? I would love to bait somebody into like an Ethereum style debate about something, but everyone in Solana is just like, yeah, no, that's a good point. We need to figure out a solution. Thanks.
Yeah, I think we just like it's a lot more engineering dominated than like high priest dominated culture. So the natural tendency is like, okay, somebody says this is a problem. Okay, step one, is that actually a problem? And sometimes we disagree there. Like, if it is a problem, like, let's get directly into solving it so we can solve it as quickly as possible.
Dude, so I think like recently in Ethereum land, so like after they set Tomas as, I get like, I don't know the official title, maybe like the CEO or co-CEO of Ethereum. Tomas, like, very aggressively going after like, things that move the bottom line. And, he's like, I've been a huge Tomas fan for a very long time, super bullish on anything related to Tomas. I think he's in large part driving a lot of this stuff because he also was quite unaligned, back in 2023, 2024. And I remember like after this big post from Tomas about like things to improve like the L1 blockchain, the very same day Vitalik released this post about like how 5 years from now we'll have like a ZK validated consensus. And then Tomas quote tweeted Vitalik and it was the most like it was the most like, thank you grandpa, now sit down, like quote tweet I've ever seen. And I've never seen anyone that's like works for Ethereum like actually like do that. But he was basically saying like, Vitalik's ideas are great for like the distant future. This is not what we're focused on right now. And to see him publicly say like, hey, the high priest is wrong, or at least the high priest is like distracted by the very distant future, was really cool and very bullish for Ethereum.
Yeah, I thought that was bullish. I thought the Reth post that came out after that, which was like, hey, we're not focused on risk five at all in the near term, was also bullish, sort of on that. From what I'm like on the outside, I have no idea what's going on, but from what I can tell, there's kind of like a Reth and Nethermind constituency. And then there's like a Prism, like some more the consensus clients constituency. There does seems to still be a little bit of tension between those two groups. And I thought like the recent discussions like around Fossil and around slot structuring and just that whole like what is going to be the flagship consensus EIP, it seemed like was pretty directly in conflict with what a lot of people on the execution side wanted, which was to go directly towards shorter slots. And I thought that was like a little interesting. Like the narrative is like, hey, now we're doing scaling the L1, and then you have an opportunity where you could easily go to 6-second slots and nobody wants to do it. And they want to do like some fancy features like EPBS or Fossil instead. At a certain point, like, I don't think Tomas is the absolute dictator of Ethereum. I'm pretty like I don't want to speak for him, but I think if you asked him, like he's like, "What's the thing that you would like to see out of these 3 6-second slots, Fossil or EPBS? Which one would you choose?" I'm pretty sure he would choose 6 seconds, although I don't know. I think there's a lot of other people who would also choose 6 seconds, like Georgios.
Yeah.
And again, I don't want to speak for them, but I'm just like trying to describe for the listener what I'm observing. There seems to be some tension. The consensus clients don't seem to necessarily agree with execution clients.
So, like, I guess like more broadly speaking, in Solana, the consensus client and the execution, it's the same client, right? Like, it's all just one monolithic piece of code.
Mm-hmm.
Is Alpenglow going to change any of that?
Well, I mean, it's like in separate files. Like there's consensus.rs, which will be
different crates, as they say.
Yeah.
Oh God, are you becoming a Rustacean? Are you going to tell me about how blazing fast your programming has gotten?
Although Solana did sponsor the Rust conference, we were like a diamond sponsor, and Alessandra, who works on our team, had a little talk for the Rust people about blockchains.
Because like you were I feel like saying you're an idea guy kind of is a low blow, but like you're a mechanism designer, you're a economics game theory person. I'm imagining now you're doing a lot more engineering and getting like your hands, like you're really rolling up the sleeves and getting into the code now.
Yeah, I think you just have to, because you don't understand the mechanism that you're working on unless you really look. Especially the scheduler, especially, is really complicated, and even made even more complicated by the integration of the Jito scheduler and the regular Agave scheduler. And obviously, FireDancer has their own implementation as well. So in that, it's just like the only way you can really figure out what's going on is to look at the code and then run. Even looking at the code is not enough. You need to run experiments too, because it's like such a complex system that you can't figure out what's going on just by reading it, or at least I can't. Maybe people
Max,
smarter than me can.
so when you say scheduler, you're talking about effectively, I don't want to call it a sequencer because Solana is moving so fast that like there's a lot of implications there. But like, can you walk us through in broad strokes like what the Solana scheduler is doing?
Yeah, so Solana has pipelined consensus. So it starts basically streaming out the block. Instead of like Ethereum, where you would build like one block at a time and you would put all the transactions in and then you'd send out the block, Solana is kind of constantly streaming out transactions. And then at the end of like a 400 millisecond batch of transactions, you do consensus on that batch. So the scheduler is the block packer, but in a continuous setting, in that it's deciding which transactions to include and when to include them all the time.
I remember, and I'm obviously not an expert in Solana. I'm not even if I'm being honest, like even Rust is something where I'm like, not, I wouldn't even say I'm like good at it. I'm like, okay, but like, I still battle the compiler a lot. Lifetimes still bother me. Um, so like, I seem to recall, and I think it was Eugene that described this to me like 2 years ago, where a core part of the scheduler, whereas like on Ethereum, you're just like sorting purely based off of economic value. Whereas in Solana, at least like, 2 years ago, a big part of the scheduler was like you're really trying to avoid a sort, like an ON complexity like thing to do. And so I don't even know if it's ON. I really have no idea. And so like basically the way it was explained to me, and this was the first time I became a little bit like, bearish on Solana mechanism design. But the way it was explained to me was that it was first come, first serve as long as you could get the lock. But if a transaction's access list overlapped, like if there's an intersection with the access list of another transaction that was currently being scheduled, then the transaction got kicked back in the queue. And the priority fees only became relevant because the priority fees had to do with how far back in the queue you would get kicked. If you had a low priority fee, you would go all the way to the back of the queue. If you had a very high priority fee, you would just get, you'd get put pretty close to the front of the queue. But if there was no lock contention, you would just get basically first come, first serve. And I found that to be very interesting because from an engineering point of view, that makes a lot of sense. Having to sort stuff is something that would slow down the chains. But at the same time, kind of undermine the concept of a priority fee. And I imagine you are spending a lot of time looking at stuff like that over in Solana land.
Yeah, that's an example of where the engineering performance culture goes way too far, right? And any like heuristic that's as simple as like increase bandwidth, reduce latency is not gonna capture the nuance. And luckily, we have fee sorting. Every single transaction gets sorted and gets put into a heap and gets popped. Like it's like we're not doing it like that is like not a practical issue, but at some point it was like first come first serve, and it was very bad and it was very hard to land a transaction, and there were no priority fees because there was no reason to pay priority fees. But it's funny, like the cultural difference between we're gonna put 100 GPU cluster on proving Ethereum blocks and we can prove like 97% of them in 12 seconds, versus you go into a meeting with like some of the really cracked FireDancer engineers and they're like, oh yeah, we don't really like this part of like your design because it's a sort, and the sort is super linear. And it's like, oh well, it's n log n. It's like not, it's just barely super linear. It's like 6 times n for a million things. But that's like definitely a big cultural shift where it's like, wow, performance really matters. And if you try to suggest things that are like gonna disrupt the pipeline, you're gonna get flamed for sure. But sometimes you need to do those things, and it's a trade-off, and you just need to make the argument. And all the schedulers sort transactions. They sort transactions in small batches, but that's important for a functioning fee market, and a fee market that functions is really important for making the chain work. So
How has the process been? Because it's kind of like, in Ethereum land, Ethereum like, engineers would come in and they would be like, we should do this, and then the mechanism people were kind of the priests, and engineering took a distant like backseat to mechanism. In Solana, it sounds like it used to be that mechanism took a pretty distant backseat to engineering. Do you perceive that as something that is changing?
yeah, I think it's like a healthy change in that for things like consensus, it doesn't matter like how smart you are as an engineer. Like that field of study is so unintuitive that you really need an expert to, like, you can't just vibe it. It just doesn't work. And for something as critical as consensus, it definitely requires somebody who has like a lot of theoretical background to really be able to push the boundary in a way that's safe for the protocol. And by safe, I mean like formally safe in live, that will not break down. Like it's easy to get something for consensus that works 99.99% of the time. And then a last mile problem is really, really hard. And
Yeah.
you just need an academic who spent like 5 years seeing why all the things failed. I think the same is pretty true for economics, where like everybody's economics is different in that like I think consensus, everybody like sees their first consensus protocol and says, I have no idea what the hell is going on here. Whereas economics is more like, oh, everybody has like an opinion on economics, and it doesn't really, it's again that problem of like, oh, this kind of like feels right, and then when you actually put pen to paper, it doesn't work, and it doesn't work in practice. So it's a similar like, and then engineering, like just like pushing packets and pushing data through the system is like much more like just get your hands dirty and do it and run the profiler and fix the thing that's slow. And like a theoretical understanding there is not going to help you that much.
Yeah. I think from my point of view, one of the things that really helped me with distributed systems and consensus protocols was running nodes in different parts of the world and seeing what would happen when some of them would like follow one fork and others would follow another fork, and like knowing the pain of odd consensus choices was something that when I started looking at stuff like, I mean, really just like Tendermint was probably the first one I studied, but like it is very unintuitive. It's very, very, very unintuitive because you have to look at a system from the perspective of like the individuals participating in it, but like in totality. And yeah, and like if we're being honest, like the Solana documents on their old like proof of history consensus mechanism were like not uh, super straightforward, if I recall correctly.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that will be fixed with Alpenglow. There will be like a serious consensus spec that is very well documented and provably safe and live and provably latency optimal. That's like great step forward because it makes it way easier to maintain and way easier to build on top of. Are you familiar with this like compressed sensing field? Um, it's like a field of applied math that Terry Tao basically started. He was just like, YOLO, he's a theoretical mathematician. And he did like some pure math all the time. And then he was like, oh, let me just YOLO do some compressed sensing stuff. And it becomes this huge field because it's Terry Tao and it's like kind of cool math. And then you like actually look at what it's used for. And the biggest thing they got is they got like uh, twice as fast CAT scan. And that's like the only thing it's ever been used for in practice. I'm summarizing a little. I don't know that much about it, but that's kind of what I feel like is the common failure mode for like academic researchers is you find something where the math is really cool, that excites you, that will get published in a journal, and it just doesn't solve any practical problem. And then you just nerd snipe yourself, and you just like spend years and years doing something that, like, a 2x improvement for context is like, you send Alessandro in there for like one day, he will improve the performance of the CAT scan by 2x.
Yeah.
You just like run the flame graph, and you just like, oh, like probably we shouldn't like copy this data around all the time, like 5 times. Like maybe we should copy it once, and then there you go, 2x improvement. Or you could do 10 years of compressed sensing math and get that. And that's like the common failure mode. But then you have to really know, like, when is it time to break out the pen and paper and the Greek letters, and like where does it provide 100x improvement, or like where does it give you something that's just not possible in any way with better message passing, better like use of the threads.
That makes a lot of sense to me. Does it also work in the opposite direction, though, where good engineering can be used as like, like trying to optimize, like we're going to refactor this whole thing, when in reality, just bring in one economist and work on the mechanism design a little bit and get that 10x that way?
I think it does. It's like there's things, like I was looking in the scheduler, I posted a thread about this. There's this thing in the scheduler where if there's too many packets coming in, it just drops them randomly based on local thread randomness. So imagine like you just like call the like call center, and you're like, and then they're like, oh, sorry, we have too many calls, like we're just gonna like hang up on you randomly. Like, what are you gonna do? Like, well, then you call back, and then they drop you again randomly because they're overloaded. Call back again, they drop you. Then you like spin up like 100 phones, and you're like, okay, I'm getting through this time, I'm gonna call back like 100 phones, and like maybe you get through with one. But what you've done is actually created 100x the load. And I think this is like part of the explanation for what was going on in the really serious congestion period. And the way they eventually fixed it is like partly the mania of ore died down, and partly they just expanded the capacity a lot, so they weren't over capacity. But then you see something like I don't know, Trump or Melania Day, and you start dropping randomly, and you just get way more transactions coming in. So the solution, like, I think actually was probably much harder to open up those pipes and make it so we could actually process way more transactions. Very glad that it happened, but there were probably easy like fixes that could have happened from a mechanism design perspective. Just like, hey, maybe don't drop at random, maybe drop based on like the one that has the lowest hash, so that you can kind of do a little POH mine. And then at the next layer, it's like, oh, we just like assign some capacity based on your IP address. So the correct way to land under congestion is to get a bank of 64,000 IP addresses and like send one transaction from each of them, and they all go through, and everybody else is like getting throttled because they're sending from Helios, and Helios is one IP address. So
yeah, I think that actually happened on Arbitrum. So this resonates with me a lot. I think that like every time I've been looking through a blockchain mechanism and I see the word random, it's been a bad thing. Because whenever you introduce randomness, like there are just inefficiencies that'll pop up either through like accidentally incentivizing Sybil, or through like incentivizing like people to like do whatever it takes to game the randomness. And yeah, just like in general, I've seen like, for instance, like transaction propagation is the one I probably spent the most time with, where like transaction would be like randomly propagated quickly to some people and slowly to others, and so searchers would just like have thousands of nodes, which is why MEV searchers were years ahead of everyone else when it came to like running light clients. But yeah, dude, like randomness, I've never seen it work out well. And the thing is, like, randomness is just a very, very easy solution if you're an engineer.
yeah, like the engineer is thinking, okay, I have way too much load. How do I get rid of this as fast as possible? And then like the Jerry is like, oh, let me just like drop this randomly. And then
Yeah.
and it's like, yeah, you really dropped that thing really fast. It's just then you made it so that there's incentives to add 100 times more coming down the pipe because you dropped it randomly. So yeah.
Yeah. Dude, I've always found that to be interesting because like Ethereum just cares so much about the solo stakers, and I feel like it's made a lot of arguably like irrational sacrifices in order to preserve and protect their the solo stakers. Meanwhile, Solana, I feel like it does care a lot about the TPS. And so something like adding in a mechanism so that the transactions are dropped based off of like just looking to see what the priority fee is before you drop the thing. Something that simple would be like, well, we have to then, load the priority fee into the stack, and that is like a memory lookup. And it's a very dogmatic conversation when you bring it up with like the engineers from my point of view. And I imagine it's kind of conversation that you're having pretty frequently over at Solana, but the Solana people are open to talking about it from my point of view, which has been like a real pleasure and why I like engaging with that community so much. But I imagine you have a lot of those conversations on a day-to-day basis about the trade-offs between engineering and mechanism robustness.
Right. And it's just really hard. Like the transaction funnel, and I think Base is really struggling with it and has been for a while. Like they have this priority ordering that happens. And that's of course not like, oh yeah, they sort everything. Yeah, it's 100 transactions a second. They can sort it 100 transactions a second. But if you do kind of like, if you look at what's actually happening on the scheduler and like how you actually land, there's a bunch of dropping going on because they get overloaded. And when you start dropping at random, when you get overloaded, you get more overloaded. And you talk to searchers who are trying to use Base, or even like I was talking to somebody who is a stablecoin provider trying to use Base, and you're just getting dropped, and like there's no acknowledgement, there's no nothing. It's just like, oh, sorry, we didn't have capacity. And then what do? You like start sending some more. So you do like turn your max retries up, you spray and pray. Anyway, and I'm sure it's happened like everywhere. And this fundamental problem, which I call like quality of service, is really, really hard because the transaction, as you said, is not deserialized yet. And critically, like in order to sort by priority fee and make it non-DOSable, I have to take the packet, right? I have to like, unless I'm doing it all in the NIC, I have to like get it off the NIC somehow. And then I have to deserialize it. I have to look at the signature, verify the signature, which is expensive cryptographic operation, load up the VM, check that the LAN ports in the account are there, check that this transaction is valid in a bunch of other ways, like this isn't a duplicate transaction. This isn't a transaction that was landed in the last block. The nonce is valid. The recent block hash is valid. All of the data loaded is correct. So all of this work has to happen before you can put a transaction in the block, because otherwise you're basically not getting paid for it. And then there's like this DOS vector of like, I sent a bunch of things with like a number in the fee priority fee field that's really high. And for example, the signatures are just all invalid. And so you're basically doing this work at the top of the funnel without any information at all. And with Quick, it's even harder because it's encrypted. So you have to decrypt before you can even see anything. You can't even see the transaction or whatever. So that's like all important and really hard problem. And it's like kind of fundamentally difficult because you want to use information that you just don't have yet in the funnel. And the way to do it is you basically, when it gets low in the funnel, you kind of send a message back upstream in the funnel like, hey, that sender was like sending me some good stuff. So you like hook it back up all the way to the top of the funnel, which is like the quick ingest. And you say, oh, this sender sent me something good. Like let a little bit more of them through. And so I think that's like where we're headed in terms of quality of service. And whoever runs the scheduler is going to try and do these kinds of things. It's just not an easy problem to do.
It reminds me a lot of like Schrodinger's cat, or Schrodinger's box, where it's like, in order for you to look at the values you need to look at in order to sort the cat relative to other cats, you have to open the box, which kills the cat. And I think that's like a very poignant thing. But you mentioned something very interesting, which is like trying to, I don't want to call it a reputation system, but like, trying to like at the ingress point into the network, the entry point to the network, having that entry point do sig verify, do like nonce handling, that kind of like balance verification for like, gas or, CUs or whatever network you're on, whatever the relevant way to pay for a transaction is. And then having like the middle steps, like the hops in between that entry point and the validator, just kind of trust that it's happening at the top and it's happening at the bottom, and with the right type of like reputation tracking, I maybe just need to sample a portion of them rather than like do all of them. Is that something that is that a rough way of paraphrasing what you're saying?
Yeah, I guess it's just you kind of hope that past performance is indicative of future results. So you kind of hope that like, oh, this is the Helios uh, or this is the Triton Jet RPC that is really expensive and only people like it's got a low rate limit, and like usually the stuff that comes through this port is from this IP address is like pretty good to go. And then you like send it right through. And if it doesn't, then like when it fails, you like start to throttle that thing. So they don't want to throttle themselves, so they don't send you things that fail. And like hopefully on the equilibrium path, they're sending you a valid high fee paying transaction that passes all 16 or whatever transaction checks that we do. That's the hope. And then you actually get into it and it's like, oh wait, the reputation system might be gamed, where you spin up a bunch of pseudonyms. Like you buy a whole block of 60,000 IP addresses and you kind of farm reputation. And then the one time it matters, you spam and you blow out the reputation system because it matters for 20 milliseconds and nobody else can land but you. That's another layer of the problem. And so you kind of pushed it down to this reputation system. And then it's like, is there even a reputation system that's incentive compatible here? And I think the answer is probably no, especially when the opportunities are super long tailed. Like if it's just there's no opportunity, no opportunity, no opportunity, and then all of a sudden there's $100,000, $1 million opportunity, which happens a lot on chain because prices jump. That's when you get a failure of this whole system.
That resonates hard, and I feel like it's also, and maybe I'm thinking about it the wrong way, but I feel like it's also made more complicated by the like multiple peer nature. So like back when I played for the other team and was on team spam and obfuscate, when I was a searcher, like one of the things I would do is I would send every node in. So I had like I think like 20 or something nodes, and every single each node had like 200 peers, and every single peer that I had would get a slightly different transaction. And this was my way of tracking, like, if I look and see which transaction actually landed on chain, I would be able to know like which node I sent it to that then got it to the validator the fastest. And like over a long enough time period, you can get a pretty robust like data set for where you should position your own nodes. The downside though, is that like this only worked because in Ethereum blockchains, there's this concept of like an incremental nonce. And so I would send, same gas price, same nonce, slightly different tx.value, and I would actually put like a node's ID in the like transactions value parameter, so I could then see on chain very easily which correspond with. But Solana doesn't have nonces. So if I were to try to do that on Solana, I think all of them would land unless I am double spending. And so that then made me think that like if I sent three different, let's say mutually exclusive transactions to three different nodes, but then those three nodes sent those three exclusive transactions to one node, that node would then think like, hey, I got two bad transactions and one good transaction. And it becomes like really hard to attribute fault in a situation like that. I'm just kind of like thinking out loud as like a searcher.
Should we just like unpack this for the listener? I always like talking
Please.
about this stuff because this is like before my time, so I don't have any direct experience of the kind of it's more of like a historical novelty for me because it's like this is before I was even working in crypto when this PGA stuff was happening. But honestly, what you're describing were the reason that this limit that you're describing exists, which is you can replace your transaction, but it has to be at least 10% more gas fee, is because of the existence of a mempool. Every time you replace your transaction, it creates like ON messages. Everybody's sending it to everywhere. There's like a bunch of gossip. Like, I don't even know how it works. I don't think anybody knows how that shit works, but
it's random. It was originally it was random. You would send it directly to like you send the full transaction to a random selection of square root of peers. So if you have like 100 peers, you would randomly send it the full thing blindly to 10 of them. And then the other 90, you would send an announcement that you have a transaction to the others. And the announcement would be like much less data, which is a in Solana, they basically make it so that we talk about MTUs later on. Please continue.
But anyway, we don't have a mempool. So we're not like, if the thing is working properly, you send to the leader and then you try to send an update transaction. Okay. And we kind of like figure out that the update transaction is conflicting with a transaction that you already sent in the status cache or like in the dedupe. So that's how dedupe is like a Bloom filter. And we just try to like very quickly check whether it's exactly the same transaction. And then we can try to like also check that it's not like the same transaction, but the nonce incremented, but it's really hard. And the way that you kind of prevent that type of spam is that if you send a slightly different transaction, then with a different nonce, then you have to pay twice. But the problem is like, if one nonce invalidates the other, and this is something that Trent really, really cares about, you have like a potential DOS vector, which is I send you 100,000 things, only one of them can land, and I cannot check them against each other in a way that, like, I cannot do a fast Bloom filter check of them against each other.
Right.
And so Trent is like a really big hater of nonces for this exact reason, which is like you get hit by 100,000 things and only one of them, they're all mutually exclusive with each other. That's what nonces do. And like it just doesn't like work in theory, but then in practice, like we just really don't have that big of a problem with it. So
yeah, well, it's because like on Solana, the nonces aren't the way that the nonces work in Ethereum. On Solana, the nonce has to be like one of the last, I forget the exact number, like 155 block hashes.
So we actually have,
that was you have durable nonces,
and now we have durable nonces, and Trent really hates them
because I mean everyone they're the worst. They're the worst. There are some parts of the Solana code base I actually have gone through, dude. Durable nonces are neither durable nor nonces. They are travesties. They are an affront to humanity. Dude, yeah. The way durable nonces work is you have to say what your next nonce will be when you do a trend. Like it's so silly. But like they don't give any of the same benefits of like Ethereum style, like monotonically increasing nonces. It's just a way of like making sure that you can have a nonce that like lasts for a really long time period, hence durable.
Yeah, and it's hard to take them away because they offer this kind of fundamental UX benefit, which is there's 5 ways to land a transaction on Solana, and I would like to send a transaction to all of them and race them without having to choose only one. So hopefully if we fix the sending so there's only one place you send, then maybe we could get rid of nonces. But for now, you have to send to Jito and you have to send to maybe Nozomi and maybe Blockstreet's landing service. You're just sending to everybody, and you don't want to pay fees for everybody if you're only landing through one.
It's like a lot of redundant network traffic. But you mentioned that you guys are working on this. I would love to double click on that because I know that like in a lot of parts of like the blockchain world, the term multicast is like becoming very prominent, and like this is a very, very interesting subject. I would love to learn more about what Anza's take is on it.
Yeah, so multicast is something that is being actively worked on. I think it's not in this version of 00, but I think they're working on it for the next version. And the way it works is, say I want to send one message from a validator in Tokyo to 100 validators in New York City. So the traditional way to do this with like single cast, I just create like 100 messages. I send them all over the wire. And like on the cable from Tokyo to New York City, there's 100 times the number of messages that you actually need. Because you really just need like one message on that line and then split it up when it gets to the switch in New York and copy it and send it to a bunch of people. So that's kind of the basic idea. There's a few places in the Solana protocol where we do that type of operation where we it's called broadcast, and it just means send to everybody. And that's where like a multicast is useful. On that topic in general, for now, Anza's position is the network should be robust even if 00 goes down. So that means we're not setting parameters for 00, assuming that 00 is always online. Like we're not going to make fundamental protocol changes that only use this thing, but we think it could be beneficial. And it's just more of like a, how long does it take for this system to get mature enough that we feel comfortable tuning to it? There's also a really nice under-discussed feature of Alpenglow, which is that it's responsive, which is basically you can tune the parameters for, like, say we have this 00 network that's super fast. We can tune all the parameters for that situation. And then if it goes down and we have to fall back to open internet, we can like kind of loosen up the parameters and we don't lose liveness. So that's a nice feature. It kind of, I think Alpenglow and 00 play really well together. But for now, like it's so early on with 00, and we definitely cannot rely on 00's uptime for the Solana uptime for now.
That makes sense. And 00, actually, I want to get Austin on. So I'm a big 00 fan. I think like the last time I saw those guys, I was like drunkenly arguing with them about doing MEV by releasing a flock of birds in front of a microwave tower. I love talking to those guys so much. So like 00 is kind of like building like an infrastructure network. And I don't think it, like right now it's Solana only, but like honestly, like FastLane is super interested in expanding. I know like it's like they've sent out a lot of like hardware, and they're HFT people. I don't want to get like too deep into the weeds on like the way FastLane looks at this kind of thing, but we are very, very intrigued by that structure. But I also want to double click on like something that you mentioned there. So I have read the Alpenglow paper. The biggest takeaway that I had from that paper was that you guys are very explicitly like factoring in the P2P network in the design of the consensus protocol. Like it's very like introspective and like aware of like the messaging system. Meanwhile, like Tendermint, like there had to be like a whole like update to Tendermint because there was a liveness risk due to like a P2P concern. And I was very impressed with like the integration. And I would love to like actually double click more on like what you mean by like responsiveness. So is it kind of like changing the block time and like changing the finality time based off of how fast message passing is happening?
Yeah, and I think the biggest unlock of a private fiber is not necessarily just the latency, it's the determinism. Because in a network, like I think some people, my original model coming into Solana was like, oh, I'm sending over the wire and maybe like there's some slow and fast parts of the wire that are random. That's not really what happens. When you get on the wire, you kind of like go straight and like it's just like you're going at a third of the speed of light on the fiber and you're just going. Like there's not that much randomness at that level because you're just traveling so far. Like I don't know enough about like the internal crystal structure, whatever the fiber, but basically the mental model is like as soon as you get on the wire, you're on the other side of the wire in a third of the speed of light times the distance. And the real randomness on the public internet is coming from where you get routed. So which route did you take? And then how long are you waiting at the switch? So it's like basically a first come, first serve queue. Or maybe it's a priority queue, you'd hope, but it's most likely a first come, first serve queue. And so you're just like waiting on the switch. And the problem with that latency distribution is it's kind of, I don't want to say long tail, but it has like this feature where it can be quite long and it's like exponential. And so you 90% of the time get through right away and 10% of the time you get delayed at the switch and like you're way slower than you think. So if you're designing a consensus protocol and you have that feature of your consensus protocol, which is like messages 90% of the time arrive when I expect and like 10% of the time don't, then you have to make a bunch of changes to like wait for those things to arrive. You have to add a bunch of extra coding in through Turbine. Anyway, all of this is like, if you're going over the public internet, you have a lot more randomness in your message passing, and so all your timing windows are spread out because of that. And in if you're not going over the public internet and you have a fiber line that's not at capacity, so the switches are never overloaded, then you're very deterministic, and you can really hone in those windows based on the actual travel time rather than the randomness. Kind of like if you take the car to JFK, like 10% of the time it's super congested, and so you have to add an extra hour of padding. And if you take the train, it's just like always the same amount of time, so you can just go way later to the airport and always get there on time. That's like the mental model I would have.
So theoretically, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think also it like warrants considering the like correlation in like lateness, where it's like if one validator is late, are all of the other validators correlated? Like let's say they're testing to something, are we expecting all of them to be late, or is it just like at any given point in time, 10% of them might be late, but one validator being late has no impact or no like indicator for others being late, and then you could build that into your like consensus thresholds. I think like the flip side of that would be like latency games start to play a matter too, where it's like you can start trying to take up enough. This is something that we wrote a paper on recently, but you can start trying to take up enough block time to where you don't really need to, like if like 20% of the validators are in like the southern hemisphere, you can just not even worry about getting the message to them in time, as long as you have like high fidelity, reliable connections to like the close 80%. And I find this like we deal with this subject quite a lot. Like everything is like probabilistic, but like people are trying to make money. My question for you is like this is a very consensus related field, but I don't think I've heard of this stuff like actually being built straight into consensus before. So like is this something where like the latency, like are there like latency measurements that are literally like getting like signed off on and like broadcast out to others so that everyone can have like a consensus on the speed of the network? Or like how do these changes work in the context of a distributed system?
Typically the way it works is you don't see a confirmed block for a while and you like increase the window. That's the typical way that you can make a system responsive. So like say like 99.999% of the time, everything arrives in 200 milliseconds. And then some of the time, like a wire gets cut, and then like the real thing is like most things are arriving in 400 milliseconds. Then you like try to build blocks on this 200 millisecond delta window, and you're just not succeeding. And then you're not succeeding for a while. Everybody sees that you haven't succeeded, and everybody widens out their delta. So that's like the typical way it works. I think it's really hard to build explicit modeling and measurements into the protocol because you don't want to like you don't want people to have different views on what the timeouts are. So you kind of like need consensus on the fact that you're not getting to consensus and need to widen out. Also, like it's really hard to prove safety and liveness in a lot of cases. And so you have this really simplified adversarial model. You have three models. You have synchrony, which is a network model that says everything arrives within a delta time. You have partial synchrony, which says everything arrives within a delta time after some global synchronization period. So before the global synchronization period, things can get arbitrarily delayed. And then you have this full asynchrony, which is like the adversary can arbitrarily delay every message. So it's more like synchrony is like every message arrives in a finite time. And then asynchrony is eventually every message arrives in a finite time. And then asynchrony, full asynchrony is like eventually every message arrives. So that's the three models. And if you try to get any more complicated, it messes up the proofs even more.
Yeah, dude, I feel like with consensus, there was this like funny quote from this movie Dodgeball from like Ben Stiller's character, who's the bad guy. He's talking to Vince Vaughn's protagonist, and he's like, "I know you, you know that I know you, and I know that you know that I know you,
Mhm.
And I think that very accurately describes consensus, because it's like you have to know that other people know how you feel about time. And it
Mhm.
makes it very difficult. So, with that in mind, I want to double click on something you had just said with like an example. So, let's say someone wants to just be an absolute madman and run a validator in Australia. Um, why someone would do that, in a country that lost a war to emus is questionable. But let's just say they just are firm believers in the geographic decentralization, which is an important thing to consider. If someone were to do that, would the Alpenglow consensus engine lead to all of the other validators kind of just being like, no, yeah, mate, this guy's sending us a block slowly, or we might have to edit out that terrible.
That
But
might be.
would everyone else gain consensus on the fact that like these guys are very bravely running a node or like a client in like Sydney, or is it more so that the consensus client is going to help the Aussies realize that they have just too many sharks eating their fiber lines, and they're just going to spend less time building the block? It's going to is the time adjustment network wide, or is it just local so that each individual client can realize that the rest are not like getting their thing on time?
It's global, and it has to be global because otherwise you kind of split the. You can cause a lot of bad behavior. So everybody has a local timeout, but like everybody will like widen out their timeouts if they see that blocks are not getting confirmed. So like that's a like if I see that blocks are not getting confirmed, that's kind of a global property, right? And
But
then
does everyone have to widen it out and come to consensus on how much it is widened out?
um I don't actually know exactly the like algorithm at play, but I imagine it's something like I see that no block has been confirmed in the last say 5 rounds or 5 consensus periods, and I will locally adjust my timeout to be longer.
And because everyone is looking at the same consensus, everyone would have the same adjustment because they've all agreed on the past history. So you can kind of like, you don't have to propagate anything new. You're just you're just looking at past data and all running the same calculation on it.
Yeah.
Let me double click on something though, because like I actually have been like pushing for the opposite. Um, so in Alpenglow, if someone misses a slot, they get more block time. Is that maybe the exact opposite of the way the incentive should be? Because I'm assuming like more block time means they can make a more valuable like block. Like let's say that they miss a slot because they're gaming the system rather than because they're in Australia and they're
Um,
just trying to play timing games. And so they take too much of a risk with the timing game, and so they, because they're timing playing timing games, they release the block a little bit too late. And as a reward, they get even more time for their next block. Like to maybe I'm not thinking about it holistically, but that seems like the wrong direction to me.
so I don't think that's how it works. So I see the certificate for the last guy's final block, and then I set my timeouts for the next 4 blocks as like I set them right then. I'm not like uh I'm not basically giving I'm not gonna set it responsively after I see from this leader. It's like it's just like on the leader transfer when it happens.
Could you elaborate on that? So it's like
So like
if
the
a
algorithm.
validator misses a slot, all of the validators get like more block time rather than just one.
So if a validator misses a slot, one slot's not going to do anything. That's expected. If one slot gets missed, they actually get their whole leader window skipped. So if you just don't deliver a block, like we're just going to skip you right away. And most of the missed blocks on mainnet are because of somebody who is offline. And so we just like skip them after the first slot instead of after 4 missed slots.
And that's because the validators on Solana have 4 blocks in a row.
And then from my understanding, the way the algorithm in Alpenglow works to set the timeouts is like I have some delta timeout, which is maybe 400 milliseconds. Okay. And I say, upon receiving a certificate from the last slot before the handover time, now I set all 4 of the timeouts. So I set them all, and they're not changing after that.
Got it. That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense to me. So it's like there's not really an incentive for you to play any of like the games, because if you tried to play, like if you missed a slot on purpose, there's like no scenario where you would get like more block time than you lost by missing the slot.
Yeah, I think you're just like if you get skipped, it's actually really bad for you because you lose the rest of your leader window.
That's interesting. Actually, I pitched something to the Monad people where rather than like slashing people that play timing games, is if they miss a slot, just make them also miss their next block. On Monad, you don't get like 4 in a row. You just like, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. But I think that like missing a future slot when you're online is a big deal. And it's a strong disincentive without having to like go into consensus and like, slash people, which then all the validators teams like lawyers have strong opinions on.
Well, yeah, you don't want to do like the slashing is just really unpleasant for the ETFs, right?
Yeah. It's so funny to me where like a lot of engineers are very like excited about some of the novel mechanisms that get unlocked by slashing, and then it's like the closer you get to like people familiar with TradFi, the more just like absolutely horrible and terrible the concept of slashing is. The accounting, like dealing with compliance, the fact that a lot of the validators have like service level agreements with their stakers. There's even slashing insurance. Like a lot of the validators offer slashing insurance. It's so funny to me how like very, very quickly in the supply chain, you go from like engineering to this with all things consensus related. It's like very, very interesting how you go from engineers or like mechanism designers to engineers. And then like the third step is the lawyers and the investment people. And I think like going back to what we were talking about earlier with like SIMD 228, like it was a lot of that kind of drove a lot of it.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Have you brushed up against or like run into, because like I mean you guys are pretty deep in like the ETF game now. Have you guys been running into any compliance hurdles, or have you been talking to like lawyers that are like advising you guys on how to handle engineering decisions? Because I imagine if there's one group that has it even tougher when it comes to making changes than mechanism designers, it's the lawyers.
Yeah, I think we have like a pretty good setup for like we don't have slashing right now. We don't have a super long queue to exit. There's just like you can exit a lot of stake at the end of every 48 hours. There's an improvement that could be made by lowering this epoch time to say 12 hours instead of 48 hours. And then you can meet this. You have this like at or before 4 p.m. If you submit your withdrawal from the ETF, they have to be able to meet the capital call at or before 4 p.m. the next day. And with a 12-hour epoch, you could do that. With a 48-hour epoch, you need like T+2 to guarantee. So that's like one thing we could do, and I would like to see happen is like we shorten the epoch time so that just basically to be friendlier to the ETFs. But it's not like the end of the world. They can also just apply for a T+2 like special exemption if they want to, but it would be much better if they don't have to do that.
It's so interesting to me that like that is such like a critical thing, as we were talking about earlier, for like moving price, right? Like the DATs are like playing a huge role, and it's like just like little things like that where I mean, like, dude, like for us, for like FastLane, I tell my engineers that like FastLane will always be a sales first organization. Like we'll always have like stuff that we can sell, drive engineering rather than like the optimal engineering. And I honestly think that like one of the reasons why we've been so good at distribution with validators, we're like 97%, something like that with Monad validators now, is because I spent a decade in TradFi and I know the pain of compliance teams. I know what it's like to have them breathing down your back. I know what it's like to have like lawyers approve of like investment memos. I know the pain of the stuff that they go through. And so we've intentionally, like, sometimes, like, especially when we started, dude, like we had a suboptimal MEV client. Like it would have made less money than just like forking mevgeth, but we made it so that the lawyers would like it and so that it would be easier to approve. And I think that like this is just, kind of, I guess, echoing what you were saying, but like as more and more of TradFi and more of like Web2 come into crypto, I think that's going to become like a more and more common way to think about product holistically. And I do, like, honestly, like the way Solana is doing lobbying and stuff is so impressive. Like I feel like you guys go to Washington a lot.
Yeah, we have the new Solana Policy Institute that's new, and obviously the work that Multicoin has done has been really impactful. David Sachs was like an anchor in the Multicoin fund that did the Solana seed. So we have obviously a lot of friendlies in Washington, but I think the product is also just more friendly to institutions and governments. And it's like, I think it's just like, you look at Solana, it's like, hey, these guys are just trying to build a really good blockchain that's really good tech. And there's not a lot of like political, like I'm trying to destroy the government and like take over. And so there isn't just that built-in tension there. It's like, hey, we're not like trying to like destroy the US dollar. We're trying to build a better system that you can use to trade on. And so not having that ideological, like immediate turn off is really nice.
Can I just say that my favorite irony in all of crypto is the fact that, like, proof of stake, which is perhaps the most capitalistic invention ever, it's like turbo capitalism. The more money you have, the more vote you get. Like that's super. That's like mega capitalism, and it was created and is championed by some of like the biggest, like, Berkeley flavored hippies of of the entire crypto community. And like dude, the irony there is just so funny to me. So like for you guys now, like what is Solana working on, and like what do you spend most of your time working on these days? Like what's coming down the pipeline for both Solana and for Max Resnick?
Yeah, I'm spending a lot of time on getting multi-leader to a point where we can actually evaluate like a specific protocol and think about the engineering behind it rather than just like an idea. So I've been spending, it's mostly done now, but I have been spending a lot of time over the past few months working on that. Similar thing for state growth. Been spending some time taking what is basically an idea of how to solve the problem into an idea that can be evaluated and is like concrete enough to be a yes or no answer. And then scheduler, I think, is really interesting. Following Solana MEV is all like a full time job, of course, and that's kind of most of it. And then, uh, yeah,
Let's double click on state growth, because Solana, there's this concept of state rent, and I think a lot of people talk shit about the state rent. And this is, I am in a, distinct minority opinion here. I think I actually like the idea a lot. I think it's quite clever, where basically when you stop paying state rent, then your, smart contract or program, as they call it in Solana land, just deletes itself and all the state goes away. Um, are you guys looking at the state rent concept? Or are you looking at like adjusting how it's charged, getting rid of it entirely? I mean, I think it's a novel solution to a problem where, like, dude, like I know the pain of having to like go around and like provision 20 new like, bare metal machines, because all of a sudden, you just crossed the, 6 terabyte threshold after pruning your node. Like we've had to do that 3 times at FastLane. Just like you just,
mm-hmm.
and it gets more expensive each time. So we can see it literally on our budget. We can see the pain of state growth. But yeah, like how are you guys thinking about improving it?
Yeah, disk is pretty cheap, so the goal isn't necessarily like can we get rid of the excess disk storage costs. It's more so the real big pain points of having a large state for us today on Solana, because everybody's running servers, is two things. One of them is the snapshot size. We have compressed snapshots, but still they're like almost 100 gigabytes. And so you can, if everybody went down and needs
That's
to
not that
restart,
big. That's way smaller than I would have guessed.
well, the total account size is only 500 gigabytes um, with the index included. It's like less, it's like slightly less than that. But
This is actually blowing my mind. Wait, so if I had like a full Solana archive node, let's say, how much space would I be using?
an archive node, well, an archival node has all the transactions, right? So
Yeah,
that's
like you
petabyte,
can replay a transaction on any arbitrary block.
yeah, that's petabytes of data. I think it's like
Okay,
5 petabytes or something. Um, but
but if I just want to have like the current state and like maybe like the past hour, let's say, that would be less than a terabyte.
it's the compressed snapshot size is less than a terabyte. It's less than 100 gigabytes right now.
All those engineering focused optimizations starting to make a lot more sense to me, if I'm being honest. That's pretty cool.
It's like 90
Um,
to be exact, I think.
so like what do you how are you guys looking at changing state rent
Right. So the thing
if
is
you're
like,
looking at changing it?
hey, if we lower this, so first of all, state rent is gone actually because it was such a performance headache. It was constantly being calculated that it actually got removed. And the only thing we have now is rent exemption, which is like, it's very path dependent, but you pay 2 years or you hold 2 years worth of rent in your account, then you will never get compressed or you'll
Compressed.
never get like removed from the
It's
chain,
just deleted, right? It's just delete
deleted.
your
Yeah.
entire thing.
So that's like the current state. And there's like no rent paying accounts anymore. So we never
Dude,
calculate
compressed is a very, very PC term of saying delete.
Yeah, I shouldn't say compress because we actually want to do a different thing, which is compress it. So that's the current state. If we want to lower the rent, which a lot of people are complaining that like you have to pay 2 years of rent up front. Imagine you go buy a or go rent a property, you have to pay 2 years of rent up front. That would be pretty prohibitive. And so a lot of
And
people are complaining about that. You want to lower it, all of a sudden you start to have state growth and your nice 96 gigabyte snapshot gets a lot bigger.
like how much like right now in like dollar terms would the typical 2 years worth of state rent be?
For like a new token account, it's like 60 cents.
Okay, oh, that's nothing. But like I'm
Well,
guessing it scales up with the size of the program.
it scales with the size of the program. So if you want like a full 10 megabyte program, it's pretty expensive. But if the real issue is you're allocating a bunch of new tokens, that 60 cents adds up.
Got it.
Um, and like, so we're like trying to, so you say like, hey, maybe we try to reduce the state rent. Okay. Then all of a sudden we have more state growth and we're kind of right at that 512 gigabyte threshold, which is the memory requirement for Agave. Firedancers is recommended higher, and they want to store everything in memory for performance. So like a really big motivation of all this is like, first of all, can we reduce the state rent? Second, can we get it so that all of the state is in memory so that we don't have this like DOS risk of loading a bunch of cold stuff from disk? And third, can we make sure the snapshot size doesn't get too big? And that's this whole like state compression, state rent workflow that's a little bit controversial, I guess, but mostly controversial in terms of the implementation. I think the general idea of like, can we compress this shit that nobody is using? 80% of Solana accounts have not been touched in 3 months and likely will never be touched again. And we just want to get those out of the active hot state and like only keep the stuff that people are actually using.
So I imagine that like when it comes to this kind of thing, I'm assuming that uh, your own personal part is not like coming up with compression algorithms, but working on the mechanisms behind like when to compress and like the incentives and the behaviors. Can you speak a little bit about how you guys are looking at that part of it?
Yeah, I think the basic idea in the proposal that I put out is if you have this target hot state size or target uncompressed state size, and if you have too much hot uncompressed state, then you increase the rent. You charge people more, and they get eligible for compression faster. And on the flip side, if you don't have very much hot uncompressed state right now, then the rent goes down, and it's just a little controller. And then you run out of rent, we compress you, we put you into a vector commitment, and that vector commitment is like O log n, or it's O1, depending on which one you use. And then we can compress a lot of account data into a very small piece, and it's still recoverable. Like if you still want to use it, you just ask for that data. You ask for an opening proof that it's a member of the vector commitment. And then you can kind of prove that, like, hey, I have state on the blockchain, it's just not like active right now, but here's a proof that it exists and it's in the cold section of the state, and bring it back to hot, and I'll pay some rent for doing that.
That's really cool. I like that a lot, and it sounds like it's relatively straightforward too. Um,
Oh, yeah, it's always relatively straightforward until you have to write out the actual change log that has to happen for it to exist.
yeah. The devil's always in the details. Um, Speaking of, so one of the other things you said you were working on is the multiple concurrent proposers approach. And as you know, I'm a big believer in multiple concurrent proposers. For me personally, it's like if I could convince the category labs people to make one change, it would be that. Um, I'm also keenly aware, though, of the fact that, like, in general with engineering, once you optimize something, it becomes a lot harder to add new features to that thing. And so when I look at Alpenglow, like this is a very optimized consensus algorithm. And so I was very like, pro MCP, pro multiple concurrent proposers. And then I saw Alpenglow and I was like, well, shit, this is going to make it a lot harder for them to add MCP to consensus. Am I thinking about this correctly?
I don't know. That's how I think of it. I think of it kind of like Alpenglow is a building block for basically state machine replication or atomic broadcast or like whatever Byzantine agreement, whatever. It's like this like core building block for coming to consensus on a thing. And then there's this whole separate thing, which is like, which thing should we try to come to consensus on? And the way that we've built the kind of candidate specification for multi-leader is that it's just a gadget that sits on top of the underlying consensus mechanism. So we get all of the performance improvements of Alpenglow because it's just black box call to Alpenglow to come to consensus on this thing. And then the thing that we're trying to come to consensus on, which is like kind of the execution block or like what will go into the execution block, is decided by multiple people in a way that is censorship resistant and has this hiding property that we want. So it actually plays pretty nicely in the way that we've done it, which is that Alpenglow is basically a black box.
So that would imply, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I'm shooting from the hip here, but that would imply that you're just sending a single block from a single proposer into the Alpenglow black box, and that there's not, because like with multiple concurrent proposers, from my point of view, and you're the expert, not me, but like from my point of view, the big problem is how do you merge the little like sub blocks, and there's a lot of different ways to handle that, and like gaining consensus over how that merge happened and like what's valid and what sub block was arrived on time, what sub block didn't arrive on time is like a tricky problem, solvable but tricky. And so I guess like my question for you is like when you say that Alpenglow is a black box, do we have like a complete fully merged block that is hitting the black box, or are we kind of having each of the multiple concurrent leaders sending their thing into alpenglow, and then the alpenglow kind of does the merging. Is the merging pre or intra alpenglow?
It happens before. It's also not the. So what the difficult part is come to agreement on a set of transactions in such a way that that set of transactions is censorship resistant, and this other property we call hiding, which is if you want to send something in there, you don't get to observe any of the other things before consensus is done or is like past the point of no return. That's kind of the two hard parts, and really what we're trying to do is like get a set of transactions that has those two properties, and then once we have that set, that output can go as the input to alpenglow. So and then you like have this like, how do I sort and merge? And that's actually, it's like hard because there's so many ways to do it that work. So I don't consider it like, oh, I'm going to spend like all my time doing this, because you can just like sort them and order them by priority fee if you want, and that works really well. Or you can do other more complicated stuff if you want to, but I don't see it as like I'm going to spend a ton of time writing out how to do the merge algorithm, although it's an important question. It's like, I know something there in that space exists. I'm not going to spend. I'm more like concerned like, oh, does something that satisfies these other two properties to agree on a set of transactions exist was more of the focus of this exercise, and I think we found something that we're pretty satisfied with.
Got it. Let me double click on this a little bit, because I'm really fascinated with this kind of thing. So let's say you've got multiple concurrent proposers. You've got 3 sub-blocks. Let's say there's 3 concurrent leaders. You've got 3 little sub-blocks. 90% of the network thinks that sub-block A arrived on time. 90% of the network thinks that sub-block B arrived on time. 50% of the network thinks that sub-block C arrived on time. First question is, does this analysis of like, did it arrive on time, does that happen inside of alpenglow? Because alpenglow is already kind of like checking this kind of thing for like full blocks. Or is there going to be like a consensus over like timeouts for the merging pre alpenglow?
Yeah, so this is actually the fundamental difficulty of the problem, which is I have like multiple bits that I have to decide on, and that's just like hard because some people have some views that are maybe not consistent with others. And the way we solve it is we use this erasure coding trick. So what happens, all the proposers, there are multiple of them, they shred their block into a Reed-Solomon erasure coded set. And they send the first shred of that block to relay 1. They send the second shred to relay 2. And so eventually relay 1, if everything goes right, is receiving shred 1 from proposer 1, shred 1 from proposer 2, shred 1 from proposer 3. And they create a message that says, here are all of the shreds that I got on time. And then they send that message to a consensus leader. The consensus leader collects sufficiently many of the relay I have these shreds messages, and that's their block that they like input into consensus. They say like, this is my view of which relays I saw, and like, let's agree on it. Okay, so then how do we construct a set of transactions? Well, we say, among the set of blocks here, which blocks are we convinced can be recovered based on how many relays have said they have them? Okay. And if it's like, say, greater than 60% of the shreds for this block arrived at the respective relay on time based on the attestations that are included in the block, then I think that the block will be able to be reconstructed. So let's come to consensus on the fact that that's valid. And that kind of weaving together of the two layers is what solves this issue of like, we disagree on whether block 3 arrived or not, even though we all agree on whether block 1 and 2 arrived or not. It kind of like, I don't know how to give intuition for it, but it kind of like is a weave that weaves them together, and they kind of all bind each other.
And this all happens pre Alpenglow. It's not
Yeah.
like you're pipelining parts of this into the Alpenglow consensus mechanism.
Well, in Alpenglow, like the thing that happens before Alpenglow right now is Turbine. Okay, and this is kind of replacing Turbine. It's like instead of the leader broadcasting this block, um, the the proposers are shredding, and instead of shred and send, they're shred and send to the relays, and the relays send to the consensus leader. So yeah, this is like all before the input of Alpenglow. It's kind of like it's one extra round, and it's replacing the Turbine part.
So would it be fair to say that this is like a separation of sorts?
Yeah, it's definitely we try to modularize it so that this is like not a consensus algorithm. It
So,
inherits the safety and liveness of the underlying consensus algorithm.
so would it, the entities that are taking, the different transactions, like the sub blocks, they're you might even say building them, and then the relays themselves, which I'm assuming are like full nodes, they're really more like proposing these blocks into the Alpenglow system, and indirectly. And would it be fair to say that Max Resnick brought PBS to Solana?
I don't think that's. I think it's the opposite of that. It's basically like there's no there's no competition. Like everybody can propose their transactions in their block. Like it's the opposite of PBS. PBS is like, oh, one guy builds the block, and it's whoever can pay the most, whoever has the most private order flow. This is
I'm really just busting your balls for the sake of humor. I'm a huge MCP fan. I do think that I love how mechanism designers love separating things. It's like you guys just like can't like have a set and then just like it's every mech designer's favorite thing to do is just separate sets into new sets.
well, it just makes it way easier to reason about, right?
Yeah.
If this thing is something on top of Alpenglow, which we already know works and is fast, then what we're really evaluating is just like the change log, right?
So this is like one extra round of communication. It sounds like. Well, talk to me more about like the relays. Like what are the roles of the relays in the system, and like how would one become one?
Oh, it's just like randomly selected from the validator set, the same way they are in Turbine.
Stake weighted.
Yep. So their job is just to kind of that extra round is kind of like forcing this agreement before we go into consensus.
The extra round is also there just to like make sure there's no you don't have like a fair exchange, like credible commitment mechanism, so that the relays. But like really, it's like as long as one out of n relays are honest, you get the censorship resistant properties that you're looking for, right?
So, not exactly. We want we're gonna erasure code it, so any one shred is not enough to recover the whole block, and that's like you kind of need more than one honest relay, but you don't need every relay to be honest. You can tolerate Byzantine relays.
Okay, so this is interesting. All right, so let me double click on this. So when you say erasure coding, you're not talking about taking a large, because so there's like erasure coding where it's like you have like packets, and you send all of the packets to the same destination. You need more than one packet to recover the whole, but like one entity should be able to recover the whole, even if a single packet got dropped, because you're sending them all of the packets.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're talking about erasure coding, you're not talking about I mean, like, there's obviously a lot of like overlap here, but like, you're not talking about packet recovery. You're talking about participant recovery of the whole.
Yeah, I mean that's part of it. I think part of it is like it's just the broadcast version. Like Turbine is kind of the broadcast version of this erasure coding, and it just saves a lot of output bandwidth from the leader because the leader doesn't have to like the leader doesn't broadcast the entire block to every single validator. They broadcast like a little bit to you, and they broadcast a little bit to somebody else, and those guys forward it on to everybody else. So it's just kind of saving some some output bandwidth on the leader, and it saves some time as well because you're saving the output bandwidth, and then we're kind of like taking that and then adding on to it to give these censorship resistance and hiding properties.
It is very interesting. I'm actually super opinionated about this because I feel like getting the full block is more valuable for some people than others.
Yeah,
We can talk about this offline later. I feel like in general, the MEV space is like, hey, give me the full block first, then start doing that erasure coding stuff. I don't want to have to ask 3 people to send me something before I can start working on the block.
yeah, but we're not we're not making the block for atomic R bots. That's the thing. Like that is not the customer of the blockchain.
But they are willing to pay a lot, and that's so interesting. So, like, let's actually talk about that. So, one of the critiques on, dude, actually, yeah, let's definitely talk about this. We should have brought this up way sooner. Solana doesn't have a mempool. There was a period of time when Jito was running I hate using this term, private mempool, because like it was pretty public. You could listen to it if you wanted to, but it was a centralized mempool. Let's call it. And then Jito turned it off, and there were a lot of people in Ethereum land that said, hey, this is really bad. Now the people that are willing to sell stuff to the art bots are going to accrue stake faster than the ones that didn't. And then like this whole extra like Solana stuff started happening where you don't have to have a private mempool to be able to listen to transactions if you're intercepting them on the way in to the validator. So there's like 2 separate ways, and it becomes like a 1 out of n like leaking thing. And the Solana MEV conversation is very interesting because it's like a very different type of private order flow, but it's still like private, or people use that term a lot. Like, what are your takes on Solana MEV right now? Which I'm admittedly, like, I haven't looked at it in about a year. So like, not talking about BAM, not talking about Jito, but more so from like the consensus level. Like, how are you guys looking at the role of MEV in the Solana ecosystem?
Can you clarify like what's the role of it? Like what is the
So Ethereum land, very, very big believers in we have to max extract MEV and distribute it to the stakers and democratize that so that the stake doesn't become unbalanced, and that would be a threat to decentralization. It's not clear to me that Solana people have the same like goal or the same like motivation and the same like end point that they're driving towards.
Yeah, okay. So my point of view is that the thing that is really bad is that you create a maximally extractive PBS style system where every block is just squeezing the most money it can out of users. The reason that that's bad is in the individual block, you may make more revenue, but over the long run, all the apps are going to leave. And so a lot of my thought process is like, how do we basically avoid that end state? And I think if you don't do anything, eventually you'll end up there. So that's just my general feeling is like, it may take a while to get there. And that's one of the things that you kind of appreciate on Solana is that the blocks are really fast, but these kind of games don't play out as fast as you would expect, first of all. So, you know, we've had this situation for a long time. People are definitely not running the most extractive scheduler. Now that Firedancer came out with a button that you can press that like makes your scheduler more extractive, there's a lot of people pressing the button, but nobody was willing to like kind of go in and mess with the scheduler before. There were very few teams who were doing that. But now that it's kind of been made accessible, you kind of see the preference there, which is like, hey, can I make more money? Of course, I would like to make more money. Let me press this button. But
They just don't want to be the first ones to press the button because then they're the bad guys.
or they
But
just
if Firedancer puts in the button, then it's like, oh, Firedancer put in the button, you know, it's there to press.
everybody else is putting in the button. They're trying to take my stakers with more block rewards. Yeah, so it can really go from a pretty good system to a pretty bad system relatively quickly.
Yeah, it's like the like I mean I know you think the same thing, but it's like MEV is such like a path dependent thing where it's like you know if someone has like the MEV layer, uh, you know, like a company, let's see, I'm just pick a random company, let's call it FastLane. Like they don't necessarily have to be like maximally extractive, right? Like validators have a lot of friction when switching clients. The lawyers, the regulators. I still to this day maintain that PBS exists in order to give plausible deniability to validators for like max extracting. Um, but yeah, like adding the button, especially FireDancer adding the button is sort of like tacit improvement. Can we talk about the button? This is the first time hearing about a button. What does the button do?
It just doesn't process any transactions for the first 350 milliseconds through TPU. So it just like only does Cheeto, and then like at the end of the 350 milliseconds, it looks into the buffer and just like schedules everything on 16 cores.
Okay. Dude, this is I didn't know this. This is actually a very hotly debated subject internally at Fastlane as we are working on a lot of this stuff as well. Um, how much more profitable is it on average?
Um, Depends on the epoch, but it's like 20% more profitable, or maybe 10%. Depends on the epoch.
Is there a way to anticipate whether or not doing that will be more profitable or less profitable? Because I imagine it's more profitable when there's MEV. I imagine it's less profitable when you just have like a lot of just like generic transactions. Because like I'm assuming there are fewer transactions when you press the button. You're just able to make sure you get the most valuable ones, and so you're trading off quantity for value.
What's your The way that the Jito scheduler and the Agave scheduler work together is like quite finicky, and same for FireDancer. And so what you're really doing is preventing a TPU transaction from beating the Jito transaction to the state that it's trying to touch. And this means that like you don't lose the high Jito tip that could get reverted. So like you don't necessarily want to let like a low TPU go first.
What's TPU?
Transaction processing unit.
So just like a transaction, or
Yeah, like
is this like a word like priority fee or?
transactions that come in through Quick, which is networking, like they get sent directly to the validator, and then there's transactions that come through the Jito block engine. And if you send through Quick, then it's different treatment than if it comes in through the Jito block engine.
Got it. And so the general idea is like when you push the button, you don't have to worry about the Jito stuff getting scheduled. The idea is like you can make sure that like nothing comes in before the stuff that's getting MEV auctioned.
Yeah, that's the general idea. And then you also are, in some ways, you have a 12 or 1.2 second leader window if you schedule everything right at the beginning, and a 1.6 second if you schedule it at the end. So it's just better to schedule at the end.
Wait, you're doing this for all 4 blocks?
No, each block the scheduler design that currently they have is like basically every 400 milliseconds you look at the normal quick transactions and you schedule them all, and then every 50 milliseconds there's a Jito auction happening.
Very, very interesting. Very, very, very interesting. What percentage of validators? So, like, I think like the general idea is that the downside of pushing the button from a network perspective is that you are kind of decreasing the overall throughput of the network a little bit. Is that like
Yeah,
the and you're like enabling more types? Like, you can't just use like latency as like a sort of like soft defense against like MEV if you're pushing the button. But is it like is there anything that's like objectively like a 0 to 1 action that is enabled when the button is pushed, or is it more just like a lot of things get a lot harder to do and things get harder to bypass rather than like is there any like absolute thing that you can't do without the button and that you can do with the button, or is it just like gradual stuff?
Well, you don't have continuous transaction processing, which is kind of the whole architecture of Solana right now. So it's like we've designed this entire system to do pipelined consensus, and then the incentives are such that you put all the transactions right at the end and you like break the pipeline.
Am I correct in thinking that if Solana increases its TPS and its block size, then pressing the button will be less profitable in expectation relative to not?
No, a lot of people think this is just not true. Like the top 10%, the top like 10 transactions in any block are like 85% of block rewards.
Oh,
So
damn.
you can include a bunch of garbage, get like 2,500 lamp ports for every single extra signature you include, but it's like the benefit of delaying, especially on the like contentious, the pump state, the radium state, the meteora state is still going to be there.
This is very interesting. This is very, very interesting. And like the general idea is that like you're preserving the value for these like top 10 transactions, and by making sure nothing else takes the state in front of them, you're getting like, these like very last second bids in like at the very end of the block. And as we know from a million different white papers and research days in Ethereum land, those are the most valuable transactions and expectation, because something 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 MEV something something super linear something something block time.
Do those still happen?
I haven't been to a research conference in about a year, so I honestly don't know, but
Well,
I assume so.
it was so
There's a bear
fun.
shit in the woods.
You basically like have 30 people in the world who know about this thing, okay, and then like another 60 people who like think they know but don't actually know, and then you select some of the 60 people to go up on stage and give like a talk, and the audience is like the 30 people who actually know what's going on, and then the entire discussion after is like, how wrong was the thing that just got set up on stage? Like, it was always such a weird dynamic because you would like, as a person who didn't know what was going on and would go on stage, like you go up and you give your talk and you're just hoping like Kevin doesn't tell you that you were super wrong. He just tells you you're only slightly wrong afterwards, right?
It's funny.
That was the dynamic there.
But that's like a pretty common thing in like academia, like conferences, right? Like it's pretty adversarial where you have to like defend your presentation.
Yeah, but in academia, at least the person giving the talk knows what they're talking about. Usually, in yeah, in the MEV, there's a lot of academics who don't know about MEV who are giving a talk. So,
Dude, I submitted a paper for like one of the conferences, like it was like 6 months ago, and like like our Atlas thing, which is where we just kind of build a giant fat transaction and sequence the operations from different users inside of that transaction to like capture MEV internally. Builders can put the transaction top, bottom, middle, and so it typically works best in scenarios where the MEV is endogenous. It's like MEV is created by one operation and then captured by another. Whereas if we're just trying to capture like top of block stat arb, doesn't really work great for that. And so like I submitted a paper on like this thing and how it's great for fulfilling intents, yada yada yada. And the MEV, like the people that rejected me for the conference said that uh, that the way I was describing the order flow was incorrect in the context of PBS. And this made me die inside because in no way is that even remotely relevant to what the paper was about. But it's like the academics, like it really is an echo chamber. And yeah, dude, like I a lot of the stuff that ivory tower talks about can be solved with just like good engineering. And I think like you were talking about this earlier, like pretty frequently, like with the CAT scan thing, like dude, like a lot of them are like writing papers on stuff that's already been solved, and it's so painful to watch that. But yeah, I've given up on that community. I'll just wait until Alex Nislabin writes a Twitter thread on it, and that's how I get my info.
yeah, you just gotta. I mean, they're trying. It's just there's way more information to be gained from talking to somebody who is actually a practitioner than from pushing some symbols around on a page. And occasionally you actually find something that's like, oh, you would never like really realize that censorship resistance is a key thing that's enabling MEV if you're like just pushing around. Like that's the only way to find that one is like pushing around. But for the most part, it's like you gain way more information way faster, and then you know which symbols to push around if you actually talk to people who are practitioners. So my recommendation for these guys who are interested in MEV and are still doing these academic papers is to actually go and talk to some people who are doing it, because you will learn like way more than you would in 40 hours of symbol pushing.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the people that actually do MEV know that if there's one person you should never talk to, it's a fucking researcher, because then they'll write a fucking paper about your your strategy. It's like perhaps the most like the only thing worse than talking to a researcher. So if you're an MEV searcher, the only thing worse than talking to a researcher is if Bert Miller finds your like contract address and writes a fucking thread on how you're making your like money and paying for your kids' food. Yeah, dude. I find like the MEV community is rightfully wary of like talking about this kind of stuff too, which does make it very difficult for the researchers. But man, like this. Does Solana have as many conferences as Ethereum? Like I know Solana has like Breakpoint and stuff like that. But do you guys have like research themed conferences? Or I guess like more importantly, do you guys go to the same research conferences that the ETH people are going to?
No, and that's like a pretty good thing. I think I actually really think the noise level on the ETH research forum when I left was so high. And I think a lot of other people felt it. And it's like one of the things that really started me like on my crash out arc was just like the noise level of execution tickets and EPBS and just all this like useless stuff. And it was just getting so much attention. And then every time somebody puts out this like kind of half baked article, and then you have to like, then everybody will ask you like, did you see this article? I'm like, no, like I did not see the article because I have a life and I have actual problems to work on. Like I'm not reading that. And then you have to end up reading it because everybody's, whoa, look at this cool new EPBS design. And then you're like, oh, let me look at that for an hour. Oh, it's broken. Here's the issue. And then they just keep going and you just like look at it for an hour. It's like, oh, that's broken. And this happens like every two weeks. So I think it's like really important. We're going to do a research event for Solana. And I've been thinking about how to curate it. And what we really want to avoid is any kind of noise creep. Like we want every single talk to be both a fundamentally interesting research insight onto a problem that actually matters for Solana. So we're not gonna have any like good theory papers that are not relevant to Solana, or any kind of papers that are not very good papers but are relevant to a topic on Solana. Like we really want only things that are high signal and meet both categories. So that's the like prerogative, and we'll see if we're successful. I think like there's probably a lot of room to run a better research conference than has existed so far, but we'll see when I have to put my money where my mouth is and actually put it together.
That's awesome. Can I give a presentation on why Solana should enable partial reverts, even though it is inefficient memory management?
You can write a SIMD if you want. It will be
God.
considered.
Dude. So when it comes to like the research, I think it's funny. So like Totally had this tweet, dude. By the way, Totally is my favorite tweeter of like anyone. I love also how everyone else in the Solana ecosystem talks about Totally. It is like my favorite interaction, and dude, Totally like the nicest person. I think I actually owe him like $20 from something. He's like such a good dude. He had this funny tweet about the ratio of researchers to engineers, where if you get too high of a ratio, then you just never ship anything. But if you get too low of a ratio, then you'll just build the wrong thing, or you'll build stuff that's like inefficient. Where do you think Solana is now when it comes to do you think they are under or above the optimal ratio of researchers to engineers?
I think it's like not necessarily just the number, it's like how integrated is the researcher and how willing are they to get their hands dirty. Because if they're not willing to get their hands dirty, then they suck up a lot of engineering time, like basically getting them up to speed on the real issues.
Yeah.
So the best ones are the ones that are really willing to go into the weeds and really understand what's going on under the hood. And I think we're in a pretty good spot with the folks that we have so far on that. So I think we're in a good spot. Maybe a cryptographer could be useful, although cryptography is a really powerful nerd snipe drug because it is so cool and the things you can do are like so insane that you can never accomplish any other way. But then like the implementation is a huge headache, and and the performance is not always so great. So
I don't even read cryptography white papers anymore because I've lost the ability to tell whether or not something can actually work in the real world or not. It's like half the time I'll read one and be like, this is really cool. And then somebody's like, oh, yeah, it's too bad they need a quantum computer for it to work. And I'm like, I didn't see that in the white paper. Yeah. So I just don't even bother anymore. I'd be lying if I said I fully understood them anyway, but I understand the things they unlock. So I think you gave me a non-answer. Do you think Solana needs more researchers or more engineers? The next marginal hire for Solana, who would add more value? A clone of Max Resnick or a clone of whoever a high-performing engineer is?
well, the scaling law in the engineers is way better than the scaling law in the researchers. Like the researchers like very quickly get to a negative point where they just like argue with each other.
True.
The scaling law in the engineer is like, oh, we have another Alessandro, then we have another Brandon, we have another Andrew Fitzgerald, we have another Ashwin. It's, that's obviously going to be way better than another Max Resnick, I would say. But most of that's because like I will say something that only I would say, and if there's two of me, then the other person will also say the thing, and then it's just completely redundant. Whereas you have two Alessandros, you put one Alessandro on this area profiling this, and you have one Alessandro on the other area profiling that. It's just doubled output.
That resonates with me. Yeah, it's like I feel like a lot of researchers. Oh, dude, speaking of, I think Malesh, our mutual friend Malesh, who you worked very closely with at Consensus, is joining the Stripe L1 as a product person, and I think that like that is kind of the way that like I don't think researchers would consider themselves product people per se, but they kind of are indirectly product people if they're like integrated well and working well with engineering. They kind of fulfill a lot of the same functionality. And dude, product people that don't know how to code and like can't read code, like to your point about the importance of researchers actually looking at the code and like looking at the code base and seeing the cost in like compute or like clock time or like cycles or whatever you want to call it. I'm obviously not a systems level engineer, but yeah, dude, like these kinds of things, every mechanism takes up CPU time, and I think that like Solana has done a very good job of like optimizing that. And so yeah, I super like happy to hear that you are doing a lot of coding now. This is like
I'm not doing a lot of coding. I'm doing a lot of reading code. Thank God I'm not doing a lot of coding, to be honest. That's why Tolly doesn't have access to the code base anymore. This would be a similar outcome, I think, if I had access to the.
That's funny, dude. I first of all, I love that, but like, pretty much all of the code is Rust, right?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts? Like, do you ever like really roll up your sleeves and get into is it the SPL, the like kind of like Solana like core it is the SPL, right? Like the core programs.
The SVM, the runtime.
Not the SVM, but there's like a bunch of like built-in programs that Sorry. So Solana programs have this concept of ownership. There are some programs that are actually owned by Solana, the entity or whatever, and I believe that is called like the SPL. Like, and for instance, durable nonces. Durable nonces would be one example of something from this crate, let's call it. Do you look at stuff like that, or are you more so looking at like the like? Basically, I'm asking like, do you roll up your sleeves and get into app layer Rust stuff, or are you mostly on like the consensus layer stuff, which I
No,
presume is also in Rust, but I don't know for
I
sure.
don't do too much on the SVM. Like we have some really smart people work on the VM, and it's just like there's so much stuff on the other side that there's like not that much time to do on the execution side of the split. Like I kind of feel like the consensus side has more juice to squeeze right now. Like there are things you can do at the execution layer that are going to make the system slightly faster, that are going to increase throughput, but they're not going to like fundamentally change the incentives of the system in a way that like I just think the biggest bottleneck for like proper incentives on a blockchain is at the consensus layer. So that's where I spend most of my time. I mean, I do know like that a nonce account is owned by like the system program, but it's like not uh, like I know that the only two types of accounts that can pay fees are like the normal accounts, fee paying accounts, and nonce account. But like it's not. I'm not gonna go write a Solana program.
Gotcha. But you are going to go make a Solana phone. I've heard tell of a Max Resnick collaboration on the Solana phone design. What's the
Watch.
alpha? What's the alpha? Oh, it's a watch.
Yeah.
Oh, that's even cooler.
Basically, this other guy named Max Resnick won a watch design competition. They made a post on Instagram and they used my face on the post because they looked up Max Resnick. And then somebody saw this Instagram post and posted on Twitter and was like, I didn't know you design watches. Like, get back to work on Solana. And then somehow I got in touch with these guys, the other Max Resnick who designs watches, and they were like, hey, like, should we actually do a collab, like, for real? And then we actually did a collab, and we
So
made
there's
a
a real
Solana
watch.
watch. Yeah. There's a real Solana watch.
How much are these selling for?
It's $29.95. So it's
That is a bargain. This is like a future Charizard to me. This is
yeah,
basically like being long Max Resnick.
it's definitely for the lore. I think there's a few left. We made 30 of them. I think like we've sold around 20 or something right now. So
Where can I buy one?
there's like a link on my Twitter.
Hell yeah, dude.
They're at Prayer. It's like a UK company. They do additive manufacturing. Um, yeah,
This
I
is
don't get any share of the of the proceeds. I just thought it would be cool to design a Solana watch. So
it does let me into the cabal uh, for Solana, so that's nice. That's awesome, dude. I love the I love like the product nature. I don't know why I thought it was a phone. I also, by the way, if there's ever a Max Resnick phone case for the Solana phone,
for the
it
seeker,
just has like your face on like the back, like that would be amazing. I would spend money on that. That is future collector's item for sure. But dude, thank you so much for coming on the pod. Uh, are there any other Max Resnick collectible items that the listeners can buy while supplies last? Because you
yeah,
come on a pod, you have to show you have to show something, right?
yeah. I think we should make some like agave tequila, which is the name of our client. That would be fun. But no plans right now for any more collectible items. This was kind of a one-off thing where they did all the work, and it was just a cool opportunity. But yeah, back to work.
I would love to have a tequila bottle that just has like your face on it, just smiling, thumbs up. That would be amazing, dude. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Max Resnick. I'm sure everyone that listens to my podcast is already following you on Twitter, but for like the one person who might not be, give the man a follow. It's amazing to have you on. It's amazing to talk to you. I can't wait to hang out with you again at the next conference that we both happen to be at. I can't wait to try to convince a lot of Solana people to do partial reverts at the Solana research conference that you're working on. We'll have to talk about this once we end recording. But dude, again, thank you so much. Thank you for the insight. Thank you for the clear explanations on the consensus stuff. This was very, very informative, and I had a great time.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks for having me.